In this video, you will learn my 10 comprehension tips. Welcome to another video. If this is your first time here and you want to master 11 plus exam techniques to land in your dream grammar school, start right now by subscribing and clicking on the bell so you don't miss anything. So let's start with tip number 1. And tip number 1 is read the questions first. So always read the questions first before you read the passage. And this is really important because once you have read the questions first, you know roughly what the question is asking you about. So this means when you do read through the passage, you will roughly start to know what the answer for each of the questions is. And this will save you loads of time because you don't have to keep reading the passage again and again to find the answer. Instead, you just know where the answer is. So that's tip number 1, read the questions first, and we can now move on to tip number 2. And tip number 2 is to underline any important words in the question. So underline any words that you think is important. So underline the words that you also think you might be able to miss. So what I mean by important words, for example, you can have not, or did not, or has not. These types of words are very easily missed. And so underlining them is a very good idea for not missing these words. Because if you do miss these words, there's a very high chance that you can get the question wrong. So that's tip number 2, underline any important words in the question. And we can now move on to tip number 3. And tip number 3 is the order of question. So the order of question is a very good idea if you don't know where the answer is for this question. If you can't find the answer for this question, we'll go back to the previous question and find where that answer is for that question. So if for the previous question, if the answer is from paragraph 5, then it's very unlikely that for this question, the answer is going to be from paragraph 3. So order of question is a very good idea if you don't know where the answer is in the passage. So that's tip number 3, order of questions. And we can now move on to tip number 4. And tip number 4 is summarize the paragraph. When I mean summarize the paragraph, don't write 3 or 4 sentences to every single paragraph, but just write 1 or 2 words that briefly describe what that paragraph is about. The words could be even as just as small as 1 word. You can only write 1 word that describes a paragraph, but just write a few words that describes what's going on in the paragraph. And this will really save you some time because when you're going through the questions and when you're answering the questions, you don't have to read the whole text. Instead, you can just skim through these words and you will know what each paragraph is about and you will know where the answer is for that particular question. So that's tip number 4, summarize the paragraph. And we can now move on to tip number 5. And tip number 5 is visualize while reading. So when I mean by visualize while reading, visualize a paragraph or the text you're reading. So visualize what is happening in that text. So this would really help you to remember and to understand the text better. So visualizing is a very good idea to understand the text better and to remember the text better. But a thing to remember is that you need to have a look on the time because you don't want to waste too much time visualizing the text. So always have an eye on the time. So that's tip number 5, visualizing while reading. We can now move on to tip number 6. And tip number 6 is things to do when you find a keyword in the question. So sometimes you might find a keyword in the question, and once we have found the keyword, we might go through the passage trying to find that specific keyword in the passage. So if we do find that specific keyword in the passage, most of the time we think that the answer is going to be between the sentence that the keyword is in. But it's always a good idea to read before the keyword and read after the keyword because you might get a better understanding for the question, so the way you can answer the question, and also the answer might not always lie within the keyword itself. It might lie before the keyword or lie after the keyword. So always read before and after the keyword. So that's tip number 6, and we can now move on to tip number 7. And tip number 7 is synonyms and antonyms questions. So most of the time, at the end of the comprehension, you might get synonyms and antonyms questions. So with this, the word you're finding the synonyms and antonyms for, always go back to the text and look at the context in which the word is used. Because some words, such as project, might have two meanings. It could either be project, so like projecting outwards, or it could be a project you're working on. So some words may have two meanings. It's always a good idea to go back to the text and read the way in which the word is used. So that's tip number 7. And tip number 8 is which questions to be answered first. So the questions you need to answer first are the direct questions. So what I mean by direct questions, for these questions, you can find the answer from just by reading the passage. You don't have to infer or anything like that. All you have to do is read through the passage and it will be right there in the passage. So these are the type of questions you need to do first because you don't have to take too much time for these questions. So that's tip number 8. And my tip number 9 will be expanding answers. So this tip is for the questions that ask you use evidence from the text. So for some questions, they may tell you to use evidence from the text. And for this, we need to expand our answers. And we will use a method called the PEE. So the P stands for point. We need to first make a point. And then the E stands for evidence. We need to back up that point with an evidence from the text. And then the E stands for explain. So you need to give a point, and then you need to back that point with an evidence, and then you need to explain your point. A thing to remember is that when you're making your evidence, so when you're giving your evidence, it must be in quotation marks. So that's one thing to remember when you're giving the evidence. So that's how you expand answers using the PEE. So now we can move on to tip number 10. And tip number 10 is to improve reading. When I mean by improve reading, read classic novels and also read novels that are very old. And reading will also help you to boost your vocabulary. If you guys want to know more about vocabulary, I've got videos on that. The link is in the description below. So go check that out. Now to learn more on 11 plus vocab, click the video on the right, and to learn the previous type, click the video on the left. So take your pick. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.